Julie Barber is CEO at Spark Consulting and has over 20 years experience in business innovation, transformation and helping high potential startups raise funding. Julie is also a non-executive director, a mentor and a speaker, and a #1 best-selling author of Investor Ready. Julie's background is working with large financial corporates such as KPMG and HSBC and regulators like the Financial Services Compensation Scheme. Welcome, Julie. It's really good to meet you. Thank you very much indeed for your time today. The first question I'd like to ask you is, you help startups and scale-ups understand what investors are looking for. What do investors look for?
That's a massive question. So what investors really look for is hugely dependent on the stage that you're at, the sector that you're in, the amount of money that you want. But broadly, what they're looking for is more than just an idea. So you can raise money before you've got revenue or a product, but you need to show that actually what you're raising money for is a business and not just an idea. So that's a really important point. They also need to show, that you have a business that can scale well, because a business that works as a small business isn't necessarily one that works as a big business. And they need to know that you're the right person to take it through the next couple of stages at least. So your capability as a leader is also a big question, and the capabilities of your team. And beyond that, they also importantly want to know what you're going to do to get them a return on their investment, because that's what they're doing. They're putting money in to get actually a decent return back on that investment. So showing that you've got clear plans for an exit, a trade sale, maybe an IPO in the future is really important for the investor to have confidence that they will get their money back at some point in the future.
With the state of the world right now, does this open up opportunities or close them down? What's your experience of investor hunger right now?
It's definitely opened opportunities in some sectors. So health, unsurprisingly, has definitely had a bit of a boom from the last 12 months. Fintech had a brief stutter during the very start of COVID and then has regained its continuous upward trajectory. And things like prop tech, property technology are starting to come through as well in the last 12 months. So the impact of the environment, of the scenario we find ourselves in, has definitely had positive impact for some sectors, and then other sectors like hospitality. It's obviously pretty hard to raise money in hospitality at the moment because of the uncertainty around the sector, although the companies that are doing well in that kind of area are the ones who are implementing the kind of delivery to home options, the remote socializing options that have made life a bit more bearable for all of us over the last year.
You help fast growth startups build appropriate corporate governance. Can you explain how you go about doing that?
Yeah, so governance for fast growth startups is a little bit different to governance for kind of long-term existing companies. So when you look at the corporate governance code, what it says in it is sustainability, transparency. What it doesn't say is growth. And so for a startup company that's looking at high growth, you need to take a slightly different tack than you would with a more mature company. They're often designing a board right from the beginning. So they really need to think about who they want on the board, what expertise they need to bring in, and at what point. So they don't have to set all of their board up at once. They might add to it gradually as they go. One of the big things as well for a high growth company is how you empower the board to support the company in the best way possible. So making sure that you have the right data flowing through the company and available to the management team and the board, so that they both are capable of telling if the company's on track, off track, being able to spot quickly if things are going slightly wrong, and being able to course correct as they go is absolutely vital. That's a big part of the corporate governance approach, is actually enabling fast governance, if you like, reactive and proactive governance in a high growth environment. And then there's a big piece as well about helping startups really understand the risks that they face, not just now, but as they scale, because every day their company looks a little bit different as they grow. So continuously understanding what the risks are, how they mitigate those risks, is also a hugely important part of governance for startups as they develop.
Startups have so many priorities. I mean, not enough hours in the day. What would you say to anyone at that stage of their business who believes they don't have the time to focus on corporate governance?
If people feel that they don't have time to focus on corporate governance, and you know, it sounds like the least sexy thing in the world ever, doesn't it? It doesn't sound like the area that you want to spend the most time on in the first place. But actually, corporate governance is what can supercharge your business, because if you have a strategy, a well worked out strategy that you're working against and you're tracking against, and you're using the governance of the company to help you manage your risks through that, to help you track whether you're on track or off track, to make sure that you've got a powerful board that's helping you in every way possible to achieve the milestones on your strategy, you're actually going to move much faster and more efficiently. If you don't have corporate governance in place, then often what you see is that companies, you know, run out of cash because they weren't keeping an eye on cash flow, or that they hit risks that they weren't expecting that turn into big issues instead of just being a risk. So actually what you tend to do if you don't attend to your corporate governance is you actually litter your path with obstacles and stress and things to, you know, that pop up and worry you, rather than things that you can think about in advance and plan for to make sure you cope with appropriately.
If you were to summarize then, what is appropriate corporate governance in a startup?
For a startup, I think appropriate corporate governance is having enough governance to support the business, to help it grow as effectively as possible without tying it up in red tape. So not governance for governance's sake, but governance that is appropriate to the stage that you're at. So a company at seed stage, who, you know, only has 5 employees, will have a very different approach to governance than one that perhaps is at Series B and now has 150 employees and revenue of several million.
What role do young people have on boards, or are boards still populated by too many old people?
So boards aren't populated by too many old people, but I think young people have the opportunity to bring fresh perspective, to bring knowledge of new technologies, of new ways of working, and also of how their generation wants to work, wants to interact with business as well. It is getting better. I think there's still some degree of expectation that that you're kind of at the back end of your career before you start going on to a board. But certainly, you know, as a board member myself, I'm really keen to encourage people who are younger. I think particularly in the technology focused environment that we live in now, and the changing pace of how we work and how we do business, I think it's really important to have younger board members who can bring new and fresh perspectives. You know, and in terms of other changes, of course, it's good to see more women making their way onto boards. We're still not at a point of equality or even close, but it's certainly better than it was a few years ago. And likewise, across, you know, ethnic diversity as well. We're still seeing a predisposal to kind of white male board members. So getting more diversity is always a good thing when it comes to steering a company, because if your company target demographic is a wide demographic, then you need to make sure that the people steering the company also have a wide demographic, so that they understand that all the potential implications of what the company might do. Continued drives towards those kinds of changes, I think, will bring really strong benefits.
Are boards becoming more diverse, reflecting the societies in which they operate?
I think boards are becoming more diverse, and they're certainly recognising that it's of significant importance. So what you're seeing a lot more with board job advertisements, that kind of thing, is that they're very clear that they are an equal opportunities employer, that they're actively seeking to create a more diverse board. So it's great to see that in the advertisements. We don't necessarily see that flow through yet into all the appointments that happen. So it will be good to start to see that really flow through into appointments. But often, you can't hire what isn't there. So if people don't believe that they are board material in the first place, they might not be going for board roles. So encouraging women or people of diverse backgrounds into board roles requires that they actually think that it's right for them in the first place.
At so many seminars, I've said to young people, apply for jobs you're not quite ready for. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. There's you're never going to, particularly moving into being a member of a board, you're never going to have all the experience of being on a board because you've never done it before. So there will be elements of being on a board that you don't yet have the skills and the experience of, but that's not the requirement. The requirement for the board is that you bring your knowledge and skills and experience from the work that you've been doing, and then work out how to apply that best for the benefit of the company that you're supporting as a board member. There's always the opportunity to do further personal development and training once you're on a board to help you brush up on skills and get support from the chair of the board as well.
This is obviously something you've got personal experience of because you serve on boards as a non-executive director. What was your first board role?
I'm a non-exec director on a global healthcare startup, and I'm also chair of the board on the advisory board for a social enterprise company based in London called Generation Success. The two are very different in how they operate. They're very different in their target markets. They're very different in the kinds of issues that the board is supporting them with. So the healthcare startup is very focused on international expansion, on fundraising, whereas the social enterprise is much more focused on sales process, on building networks, on improving operations within the company. So they're very different inputs that are required. They're quite different cultures on both boards. So being able to adapt to the different cultures that you find yourself in when you join a board, particularly if it's a pre-existing board, it's not a new one that's just being set up. It's important to figure out what the culture is, what the hierarchies might be. There's always a bit of hierarchies or politics that you need to be aware of, and really working out where you fit, what your niche is that you can really add value on, because you're not there to know everything. You don't expect to know the answer to every question that's asked. You're there to add value on specific points, and that will be why you've been selected as a board member.
I hope you don't mind me asking you this, but how did you get those roles? Because that's the $64 million question for those who haven't achieved it yet.
Sure. So the first role I got was actually a client who, when I'd finished working with them as a client of Spark Consulting, said, actually, we'd really like it if you joined the board to continue to support us. So that was a pre-existing relationship. And the social enterprise was an introduction through a colleague of mine who said she had been working with them, helping them with a couple of things, and said actually they need some help on the strategy front. And I was also interested in doing some mentoring work, which is a big piece of what they do, is mentoring young people. So she introduced me. I actually ran a pro bono strategy workshop for them, and I guess demonstrated the value of what I was able to provide. And then they asked me to apply for the board, and I did, and went through the panel interview and was accepted. And I'd been on the board for a year, and then they decided that they actually needed a formal chair of the board. And I put my name forward for that and went through the panel process again, and happily was selected as chair of the board as well.
I find it interesting that so many of these things actually happen through trusted introductions. Is the bottom line become very well connected?
It is become very well connected, but it's also about seeking out opportunities. So you can't wait for things to come to you. So, you know, even if you're not actively going out saying, I want to be a board member, what you can be going out and saying is, I want to help companies who are, in this sector at this stage. If you know companies like that who need assistance, and it may be that they don't think they need a board member at first, or they don't have a current opening on their board, but you can start to just build a relationship with a number of different companies. And then when a role comes up, then you're well positioned, and you've already built trust and credibility by the time a role becomes available.
What did you learn becoming a NED and a chair of a board?
Oh, huge amounts I've learned since becoming a NED. I think the ability to make sure that you step back and look at everything in the round is absolutely vital. So although you're there for a purpose, you're there for your particular expertise and skills, being able to step back and understand implications across the business as a whole is vital, because you'll start to suddenly see other things that might be going on, other impacts that might happen because of this change or that change. And that makes you a better board director if you can do that. And it enables you to then have conversations perhaps with other members of the board to say, well, I think this might be a concern, and then you can both dig into the issue and potentially, come up with a better solution. So that ability to step back and really look at the whole, I think, is the biggest thing that I've learned.
And what advice would you give to someone who's maybe just a few years behind you?
I think if you want to make a move into board roles, into potentially chairing a board, then you've got two key things to do. First one is preparation. So make sure that you do have an understanding of what governance is. You don't need to be fully conversant in it, but you do need to have a good understanding of the requirements of being on a board, the types of behaviours that are expected, the types of time commitments, that kind of thing. And you do need to start building your network and start working out which kinds of companies you could bring the most value to. Typically, the kinds of companies you'll bring the most value to will be ones that you can bring your skills and experience to. So if you've worked in financial services, a financial services company is a good place to look, but it should also be a company that has a mission, a directive that you are passionate about. So it's no good going to be the director of a company that, is in financial services, but it's not really anything that you're particularly sort of interested in or passionate about. It needs to be something that rings both bells, and then that will really help you to be the best board member that you can be.
Back to investors, what are the biggest trends in the investment community? I mean, ESG, or environmental, social and corporate governance, springs easily to mind.
Yeah, I think there's that's becoming a real trend, and alongside that, the mission-driven, purpose-driven business. Investors are increasingly attracted to businesses with very strong missions with social impact. Those are big trends. Apart from that, what we're seeing as well is a real increase in transition to subscription revenue models. So investors always feel more comfortable if you have recurring revenue, because it means you're not constantly having to seek out new clients, and it keeps your cost of customer acquisition down. So lots of companies are figuring out ways that they can create subscription models to attract investors. So whether that's a food box company, the likes of HelloFresh and Gusto, or whether it's a software as a service company that does a B2B business service like Xero, QuickBooks, those types of things, and everything in between, there's a real shift into that subscription model.
And finally, it's 10 years' time. Describe your perfect business life.
In 10 years' time, I expect that I will have a bigger team than we do now. We'll still be helping startups and scale-ups to raise investment, and I'll also be spending a good chunk of my time on boards as well. So I'll have a real portfolio career to a greater extent even than I do now. And I'll be looking to start heading towards retirement as well at that point.
Julie Barber, thank you very much.